Hello and welcome everyone to Copy and Paste, the clean and family-friendly Reddit reading podcast. This is the second episode of r/MaliciousCompliance, when you should be careful what you wish for. Thank you for joining me. Okay, let's get started. Our first post is made by user/lazypoko. I served in the army for about a decade and was maliciously compliant a lot. I didn't know the term for it back then and have since forgotten most of the stories I would otherwise have, but I have at least one of those that stood the test of time. I was at a training course called BLC, Basic Leader course, which is basically a class to learn some tasks required/expected of people of a certain rank. I was in the army for a lot longer than most people before finally going to this course. Because of that, I had a lot more knowledge than anyone in my classroom, and very possibly more than any of my other trainees, about 150 people. We are about a week into the 2 weeks of training. We come outside in the dark for early morning PT, physical training. We do this every morning, except Sundays. We had all of Sunday off. It is a requirement in the army to be clean shaven in order to keep a professional appearance. Now, I have thick facial hair. It grows fast, and I have sensitive skin, so shaving sucks for me. I know from experience that I get a better shave after PT, between the sweating and the shower after it tends to go better for me. And in order to keep the professional appearance, that's what I do. I use an electric razor before PT so I don't have a full beard, but it isn't close enough to be professional. Then I use a regular razor after PT. If I shave before PT, I have 5 o'clock shadow by noon, and full beard by the end of the day. Plus, I figure if there is going to be a part of the day where my hair is a bit long, I figure when it's dark out is the best time. One morning during PT, one of the instructors pulls me aside and asks if I shaved that morning. I told him what was going on and explained my reasoning. He doesn't accept this and he writes me a counseling statement. In this context, a counseling statement is a formal reprimand that unless you get a bunch of them, they don't really matter. That said, because I was in a school setting, the counseling statement took me out of the running for the army equivalent of valedictorian. This aggravated me because I had perfect scores up to that point. I spent a lot of time helping the other soldiers because I didn't really need the practice myself. I get told I have to shave every day before PT. I listen to them, and just like I had warned, I start ending the day with too much hair. I get another counseling statement. If you get 3 statements during this training, you get kicked out for not shaving. I made my case to my instructors, and once again, they didn't care. They told me to maintain a professional appearance. I had to shave 4 times a day, which is really insane and would ruin my face. I tell them this, and they say, without a medical shaving profile, medical exemption, that I will have to shave 4 times. Finally, we come to the malicious compliance. Almost. Shaving profiles are fairly common in the army, but are almost always only given to black guys. Black people get bad bumps and razor burn on their faces more often than white people, for reasons I don't know and haven't bothered to look up. To give you and the idea of the rarity of white people with shaving profiles, over my more than a decade of service, I saw a total of 0 white people with shaving profiles until I called my home unit and request to speak with a medic. I tell him what's happening and he writes and emails my profile stating that I can have facial hair below a certain length. I think it was 1/8 of an inch due to skin condition. On some people, that hair isn't crazy, but my thick dark hair, it's very obvious. I go to PT in the morning, not shaven, and get pulled aside again. I get asked if I shaved. I said no, and pull out my shaving profile. The guy reads it, hands it back, clearly upset, and says, okay. Entire day and rest of the training, I get confused and angry looks from leadership. I get stopped regularly and asked what's going on. I'm telling you, white guys don't get shaving profiles. The highlight was at graduation, when all the really high-ranking people show up. I have sergeant, majors, colonels, etc. staring me down. I see them talking to the instructors, pointing at me. God damn, did that feel good. I hope I looked professional enough for them. A little extra, I ended up getting 5 total counseling statements and somehow still graduated. Our next post is made by user/CassieBear1. Background. I work maintenance in a school board, and every summer we bust our butts using heavy machines to scrub the top layer of dirty, damaged wax off the classroom floors, and then reapplying fresh wax. For most schools, this is a full summer job, working full shifts from the time the kids leave until their return to get everything done. Each school has a head of maintenance, and each group of schools, one high school, and 5 to 10 elementary schools, has a supervisor of maintenance. Now, onto the malicious compliance. Supervisor was a bit of a jerk, who thought he knew the best way to do every job. If he didn't like you, or felt a perceived slight from you, he was vindictive too. Well, the week before the summer break began, he calls all the maintenance staff into a meeting, during which he informs that no one is to do anything with the floors until I show them how to scrub and wax them properly. Fair, I guess. Some supervisors are weird about having specific methods they like seeing to get things done. Maybe his method is better than how we've been taught, except directly after uttering his indict, supervisor goes on vacation for 3 weeks. Of course, not wanting to disobey him, the maintenance staff did exactly what they'd been instructed to do. Nothing. That was short but golden. Our next post is made by a user/independent okra8577. This is the story of how my dad, with my consent but against my advice, accidentally weaponized a tree. I live in the capital of Central European country and recently visited my parents at the countryside. They needed me to help to deal with some trees they wanted to fell. I assumed they wanted to finally make short work of the semi-healthy trees along the driveway that kept branching into the way. But no, they decided that the row of beeches at the southeastern corner of the property had to go. You should know 3 things here. 1. Those trees are really, really tall, like 15 meters, about 50 feet, and rather thin. 2. There is an equally high barn just a few meters behind those trees on the neighbor's property to the south. It is pretty old, but has been renovated time and time again to serve as storage and party location. 3. In front of the trees are compost containers, a crooked walnut tree, and bushes that my mother planted, creating a corridor of only around 7 meters, 23 feet, for the trees to land in without breaking anything. Also important, my sister, also living in a bigger city and not present when these events took place, and are actually the co-owners of the house and property, as my father transferred ownership to us some years ago. While so far those beeches had survived their fair share of storms, they had probably become a problem as they kept growing. And since new neighbors on the property bordering on the eastern side are in the process of building a house, there'd be their problem as well. So I agreed that they had to go. However, my parents wanted to fell them by themselves, meaning my dad would be the one to operate the chainsaw on them. He worked as a technician before retiring, always did a lot of repair and building work in and around the house. But he is past 70, has adopted a rather unhealthy lifestyle after leaving the workplace, and his eyesight and motoric skills, while still perfectly suited for most kind of technical operations, have deteriorated a bit. Knowing this, I objected and suggested hiring a professional to do the job and sharing the costs. I argued that any damage beechwood is pretty heavy, or injury that might occur if things went sideways wouldn't be covered by insurance and thus come in quite costly. Also, doing this without even as much as notifying the local authorities might be illegal. Okay, it's a countryside, if any regulations of such even exists. Folk here interpret them as friendly advice rather than an actual law, but I digress. My parents wouldn't have any of it and even refused to get an estimate from a professional. I did some basic research and found out that costs would probably come in at around 500 to 1,000 euros, $600 to $1,200. Not a small sum, but the forester or lumberjack would take up the work, would be responsible for any damage. No dice, even after trying to bring my points across several times. Nah, we don't need a professional. Why should we waste money when we could do it ourselves? They said, it will be fine. They said literally, and while I usually am able to put them off bad ideas by convincing one of them, this time both were hell-bent on going for it. And once that is the case, all hope is basically lost, as especially my mother can be the most stubborn as heck. At least I know whom I inherited this trait for. As the property co-owner, I technically could have just forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own, but they're my parents. I love them. They're adults. They live there and keep this stuff in order, so I refrained from taking this route. So I told them that if they should go ahead, and if they really want to, but I would not help them with this. My mom asked if I would help them cutting it up and carrying the wood once the trees were laying on the ground. Important aspect. I agreed. Also, I begged them to wait for my sister to call them the next day at lunchtime, since I messaged her about the situation and she wanted to back me up. But no. Next morning, I was woken up by my mother calling me to help cutting up the first tree, which my father had brought down successfully. So I dutifully crawled out of bed and did my part in this little deforestation project. Tree 2 and 3 out of 5 also were felled without any incidents. Then came tree number 4. My father apparently had not seen a higher up branch that stretched between the branches of tree 5. So once the chainsaw had fully severed the stem, instead of falling sideways as intended, it got caught up, swirled around its axis, and crashed into the walnut tree, which started to bend significantly due to the load. Now they wanted me to help moving the beech by pushing it to roll along the edge of one of the walnut tree's main branches. Besides me knowing that this wasn't doable, as I said, a 15-meter high tree is a heavy affair. I refused, but you said you'd help us once the tree is felled. They pleaded. I pointed out that I'd only assist once it was laying on the ground, and leaning into the walnut tree doesn't quite fit that definition. More pleading, but now it was my time to be stubborn, and rightfully so. Since there was no way to, or machinery, to pull the beech away, my father decided to cut parts off lower stems until handling it would be possible. Multiple laws of physics, however, intervened after he had cut the second large chunk, shifting the center of mass of the beech so that it would suddenly start to tilt when its branches prevented it from sliding downwards as intended. Then the walnut tree reacted to the lighter load and shifted balance by springing back, knocking the beech into the neighbor's barn like a battering ram. The dry wooden wall planks didn't stand a chance and splintered away as the felled tree forced its way into the building, creating an impressive hole. My parents now stood there, dumbfounded. My dad slowly scratched his head and tried to realize the situation, while my mother slowly started to panic. Oh no, what do we do now? What if the neighbor calls the police on us? I had watched the spectacle from the balcony and couldn't decide whether to be shocked or to descend into uncontrollable laughter. Close investigation from outside showed that the tree had crossed a chair, a table, and also caused a cupboard with party equipment to collapse. Though my dad had at least reached his goal and freed the beech from the grasp of the walnut tree, but there was no way of getting it unstuck from the barn without entering. A few hours later, the neighbor, who knew about my parents' plans, returned home, which is where this story might have taken a very bitter and costly turn. But he proved to be a very gracious guy, and took the incident, which in the worst case could have made the whole barn collapse, in stride. He first was negatively amazed by how had transpired, but after inspection of the barn, he didn't deem it to be necessary to involve the insurance or officials, and said he would repair the damage himself if my parents agreed to pay for the materials, replacement of the destroyed furniture. Thanks, neighbor, and some beer, probably a lot of beer for his time, which they gladly accepted. His bill isn't yet in, as he had just begun patching up the hole, but it will easily be upwards of 2,000 euros, roughly $2,400, plus the beer, of course, still making a professional tree removal look like a really good deal. My father offered him to assist with the repairs. The neighbor thought about it for the fraction of a second, and then politely declined. I wonder why. P.S. Tree 5 is still standing. That was all we have for today. Thanks for joining me. To listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or one of many more platforms, or to visit any of my socials, click the Linktree link in the description. And feel free to send me an audio message. Just go to anchor.fm/copyandpaste/message, or just go into the description and click on the link. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.